Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hello and Happy New Year. This is my first show back on for the new year. I'm meteorologist Kimberley Hoeppner here with your Alaska Weather edition for Wednesday, January 4th, 2016. As always, you can check our information out when we're not here. You can go to NWS. This is our email line. You can go to weather.gov at /Alaska and then just click on the area of your choice, or you could always call in on our telephone line at 1-800-472-0391. In just a moment, we're going to be talking about your public, marine, and aviation forecast. Let's start out with your weather conditions across the area that are bringing some hazards. Along the south, we're going to start out with these watches. We have a high wind watch, and that extends pretty much from the northeast Gulf Coast back towards the eastern areas of the Kenai Peninsula, mainly for Seward and Whittier. They're expecting winds to increase on Thursday evening and then continue into Thursday afternoon and possibly continue into Friday. And then across the northern areas of the interior, looking for some gustier wind conditions. We have a front pulling through. So for the central interior, we're going to see some blowing snow with 2 to 4 inches possible accumulations, mostly on the slopes of the west-facing mountains. But we're going to see those winds reducing visibilities down to a half a mile at times. So that's going to be a problem for traveling areas, as those visibilities are definitely going to be reduced. And also for the areas out west, they'll probably see the higher end of accumulations between 2 to 4 inches out towards the west there as well, and the gusty blowing snow issues are going to be a problem as well for them. This is going to continue into the Thursday afternoon, possibly the Thursday evening hours for the west, and ending later for the central interior areas later on Thursday evening. Now, looking at the northern areas of the state, we have blizzard warnings out across and around the Brooks Range with very strong winds gusting back towards the Bering Strait. The coastal locations out here are a winter storm warning, and these are for winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour, possibly even up to 70 miles per hour. So visibility is out across the northwest coast is going to be down to near zero. So the visibility situation, the gusty winds, is going to diminish conditions through your night tonight and then improve by noon tomorrow. However, we will see these winds still continuing to gust through the afternoon hours, and then look for it Thursday evening into Thursday overnight hours to improve. However, they're still going to be gusty as that front slowly makes its way towards the central areas of the state, and be on the lookout for some other areas to possibly be added to the winter weather advisories. Now, looking at the satellite conditions, mainly this front across the northwest, it doesn't look like a whole lot. Some darker colors there just because, you know, it's a colder air mass system in contrast with the air mass to the southwest there towards the Aleutians, very white clouds indicating that this is a warm core system coming all the way up from the North Pacific, a deep subtropical system. Now, just taking and putting this into motion, you can see it has a northward pull. And then if you take a very close look at this area coming into the Bering Strait, you'll see the darkening cloud cover. And this is that cold front that's going to be pushing into the state later tonight. take a look at your surface maps in just a moment. Across the central interiors of the state, mainly just some clouds between high pressure and low pressure streaming across the Bristol Bay and Alaska Peninsula. Most of the clouds have cleared out across the Gulf, with a few lower clouds not being picked up because the temperatures are so close, but mainly just a few scattered clouds there across the southeast. Now, the good thing about the transition is that the fog, the patchy dense fog that we've seen across south central and the southwest today and yesterday, the fog is now starting to improve the conditions. However, this next system is going to be certainly the thing that we're going to have to watch as that cold air mass plunges through the state. So here's the setup right now. We have a weak low pressure across the southeast, very benign conditions out towards the southeast there, with just a few light scattered snow shower activity with an upper level disturbance that moved across earlier today. And then the conditions that are most severe are across the west coast, with low pressure settling in towards the Bering Strait, bring some very strong gusty south winds here between 40 to 60 miles per hour. Now, the ridge is sitting just to the south and right now is at a 1043 millibar. This is going to be deepening or building, into this state as we head into tonight. So this high pressure system is going to be record-breaking high pressure system for some of these areas along the west coast, and this is going to definitely have some impacts on the aviators out there. Look for patchy fog around this ridge of high pressure as some low clouds get trapped in beneath. And then we have the front that'll be extending tonight towards the central areas of the state. Here's the tight pressure gradient around the low pressure system that's going to be skirting along the northern coast there, and that's going to cause, this tight squeeze is going to cause those really gusty winds out of the south direction for the north and west areas of the state, with a little bit more of an easterly direction across the areas from Dead Horse towards the eastern Beaufort Sea coast there. Now, the low pressure system across the southeast is not going to have much impacts. Maybe some cloud formations is about all, and some maybe patchy fog across the inner channels to the south. Now, along the western areas of the Bering, we saw some rain moving up ahead of a front that's just kind of stalling out there towards the west. As we head into your day on Thursday, this warm front, like I said, is going to remain stalled across the Aleutians, with some light shower activity moving to the north across much of the Bering. The ridging will be building into the northwest coast, drying things out behind the cold front. That cold front on Thursday is going to be moving in an easterly progression across the state, and an upper level disturbance in the upper levels is going to be swooping down and towards the eastern areas of the state. That's going to help that force that cold air towards the coast. Now, in response, the pressure gradient is going to be tightening as this ridge builds, and the low pressure system remains here in the southeast, causing a very tight gradient, which will cause a very strong offshore flow. That cold, dense air is going to be spilling over the Alaska Range and out through the channel terrain there. So this is going to cause those problems for Seward, Whittier, and all those channeled locations along the Prince William Sound northeast Gulf Coast areas. So stay on the lookout even for, the Panhandle on over. Later on Thursday, it'll start affecting the northern channels up there near the northern Lynn Canal. Bring those cold temperatures. Look for the colder temperatures also having some issues with wind chills because the wind's going to be increasing, the cold air mass. So the temperatures are going to be feeling much colder as we head towards the weekend. On Friday, the high pressure becomes centered over the north central interior with light shower activity possible as low pressure remains here. We've got a blocking ridge set up in the upper atmosphere with the ridge centering over the state with low pressure both to the east and the western areas. So Omega block is in effect at that time, and we'll see very strong winds gusting off the Panhandle and the coastal areas towards Prince William Sound. We'll also see some foggy issues with temperature inversions, warmer air mass just off the surface setting up across much of the southwest and the coastal areas of the eastern Bering. Now, looking out to the west, that front is going to remain stationary and begin to weaken on your Friday afternoon. However, the low pressure system doesn't quite weaken On Friday for the southeast, it just kind of sits there and spins and maintains that cloudy, but we still see that offshore flow behind that low pressure system. Right there across the Dixon entrance, we'll see some directional wind changes out of the southeast. We'll get to that in the Marines in the second half of the show. Taking a quick look at the temperatures along the Gulf Coast here, mainly in the 30s to lower 40s. Whittier did report 50 degrees earlier today. Across the central interior, temperatures a little bit, cool up there in the teens to lower 20s reported, and then across the northern tier of the state, it's still in the upper teens and towards the 30-degree mark as you wrap around through the northwest, so that cold air mass hasn't worked in just yet. Across the southwest this afternoon, their temperatures were mainly in the 20s to mid-30s across the Alaska Peninsula. Much of the the southern Bering saw temperatures in the lower 40s. Shimia was out there reporting 41 this afternoon. We don't have the temperature on this map, but across the Pribilofs, you can see that cooler air mass in there working its way from the north, and that was like at 28 and 27 degrees there for St. Paul. Looking at your temperatures for tonight, much colder there along the northern coast in the single digits to lower teens. Arctic Village down probably a little bit lower than the -6 or below 6 that we have up there. Across much of the state, we'll drop down again into the single digits, so no difference there. Out there in the southeast, still cold at 20 to 25 degrees with slightly warmer temperatures towards the Dixon entrance. Across the southwest, mainly in the lower 20s, and across the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians, seeing temperatures out there in the 30s. The St. Paul and St. George area will see possibly an increase with those warmer temperatures advecting a little bit further in. So they're not going to see too much temperature changes as we head into the daytime highs tomorrow. Temperatures possibly getting up near 40 as that little bit of a warm air mass works up. Across the central interior, again, temperatures are going to be in the teens with the colder temperatures definitely settling in tomorrow across the north and northwest, back into the single digits. Remember, with those wind chills affecting much of the state tomorrow as those winds begin to pick up. Across the southeastern areas, expect temperatures there to only get up into the lower 30s for tomorrow, with colder temperatures noted across the south central areas, only possibly getting into the 20s for much of the Kenai, and then the upper 30s for Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula area. Flying weather for tomorrow, be concerned around IFR conditions around that front that passes across the northern coast. Widespread MVFR conditions will continue back towards the western areas of the Bering. And then we'll also possibly see some MVFR conditions in the morning for the eastern areas of the Gulf with some improvement. That low pressure system stays there, so possibility for MVFR conditions across the southeast. And then improves slightly towards the afternoon as that front starts to move further to the east. Still, we'll see some IFR conditions extending into the central interior areas of the state and widespread MVFR towards the west. Looking at your pass conditions in more depth, we'll see IFR to MVFR for your Anaktuvik Pass. Again, will probably stay IFR all day. Looking at Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we'll see MVFR improving to VFR late day, and same for Rainy. Looking at Windy will be MVFR through the day as that front passes through, and Isabel will go from VFR to IFR as that front moves into that pass, and then Mentasta will be MVFR. And Tenita and both Portage are going to see VFR conditions and dry. Chilkoot and White Pass will also be in the VFR. Now, the freezing levels for tomorrow morning, you can follow the white surface line down from the northern areas of the Bering, dipping then across the coastal areas of the Gulf. And then the freezing levels in the upper levels will climb from 2,000 to 6,000 across the Gulf, and as well as the Bering. We might see slightly cooler conditions, but the general trend will be warmer out towards the west. Looking at your icing tomorrow, you'll need to be concerned around the southwestern locations and also across much of the interior of the state below 4,000 feet. So smaller plains around the ridge where the front moves through, you'll need to be aware of that high pressure as well. Now, the ridge across the Bering, we're going to see a subtropical jet stream that's very strong, especially peaking here across the strait. And then the 9,000-foot level, we'll see a northerly flow across the state, mainly between 40 to 50 miles per hour. The jet at the 9,000-foot level will stream off into the Gulf between 40 to 50 as well. Across this high pressure system, very strong winds out to the west, 50 to 65 knots, with a change of direction, slightly weaker winds there in the center of the bearing. And it's a stacked system, so the ridge of high pressure looks very similar at the 3,000-foot level, with the strongest winds noted out of the north across the central interior of the state. The offshore flow pattern will also affect the southeast. Looking at your turbulent areas, summing this all up, you're going to see some widespread moderate conditions across the northwestern tier of the state, and then we'll also see light conditions through much of the Gulf and the southern areas of the state. Out to the west, look for conditions around the backside of that ridge out towards the west with moderate conditions as well. Now in just a moment, we'll be back with your marine forecast.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service with another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining me today are not just one, but two people, both with the last name Stevens, which is even more fun, but no relation. We have Eric Stevens from Dehne and George Stevens, who is a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And today you guys brought a really cool toy, or I should say tool, with you. It's a sandbox, but why are you guys working on a sandbox?
Well, it's part of our senior design project, and we were approached by AKwx to build this for them. They had a proof of concept that they developed about a year ago, I think, and they wanted a more robust version that they could pack onto a plane and take places, and it's a handy learning tool for kids and adults.
So you're a mechanical engineering student. You've built a traveling sandbox for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, and Dehne's facilitated this. But why do we need a traveling sandbox?
Well, the prototype was such a big hit that they decided they wanted another one, actually two, that that would be easier to travel with, possibly marketable even.
Okay, so this is a traveling sandbox that's got a lot of bits and pieces and a computer hooked up to it. What is the computer doing with the sand?
The computer actually uses a Kinect sensor to read the topography of the sand or the shape of the sand, and then the computer translates that into information which it projects using a projector onto the sand, showing topographical lines and which is representative of the shape of the sand.
Okay, so this is a live mapping tool?
Yeah. It's interactive. As you're moving your hands through it, it is actively following and changing the lines to fit what you're doing.
That sounds like something I could have in my backyard.
Yep.
It'd be a lot of fun. So you guys had to change the design a little bit to make this more Alaska-fied, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, how'd you do that?
Well, the original was made out of basically lumber and Simpson strong tie type stuff, and we rebuilt it to make it lighter and basically more transportable. We can pack it down to a fairly small size, and it can be loaded onto a plane and flown anywhere in the state.
Which you guys did today. And you have plans to take this in other places of Alaska, right?
Yep, we're actually going to be headed down to Homer with it later today.
Okay, very good. Eric, how does this fit into science learning around Alaska?
Well, you know what? I think it is a tool and it is a toy. And it brings out a smile from an 8-year-old and the smile from a 48-year-old with that inner 8-year-old wanting to get out. The sandbox, it's an interactive learning tool that teaches us how topography in the 3 dimensions is related to, say, a 2-dimensional map. More about that later. Just like George was saying, it's got a Kinect sensor, not just for video games anymore. It can sense out the lay of the land there, feeds that information in the computer identifies that, sends a signal to a projector to send topographic lines to map over that lumpy ground. So you get a 3-dimensional topo map out of it. And my favorite thing about it, this is the thing that stops people at the trade show, they stop at your booth and don't leave, is that you run your hand through that sandbox and it responds in real time. It remaps the topography as you get to be Mr. Tectonic Plate Drifter there. You can make things how you want. Well, what if we made a really high mountain here and a low valley there, and the lines adjust to what you did? It's a learning tool because it shows you that connection between these two-dimensional topo lines and what's really out in Alaska. And Alaska's a place with all kinds of topography. You know, we're from the Great Plains, where topo maps tend to be just like blank pieces of paper, but Alaska is particularly gifted in this regard, and this tool helps us, I think, learn more about our state, really.
Absolutely. And so this is going to enhance STEM learning, the science, technology, engineering, and math, in many different locations around Alaska. Then this would be something that kids and teachers can get their hands on.
It sure is. And I mentioned the it's like fly paper at a booth that, or at the Science Potpourri when we had Greg's original version of this sandbox, and that one was made out of scraps of wood, and it was a prototype. But even that one, before it had some of the refinements that George and crew have made for this newer, upscaled, maybe a 2.0 version of the sandbox, even that one was so attractive to people. It just demonstrated that this has potential to be a learning tool, an outreach tool, an education tool that now is portable and can go places in Alaska. Of course, there's only one sandbox, can't be everywhere at once, but hopefully it gets out there, gets the word out about EPSCoR and what science is being done here for Alaskans.
All right, that sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands in the sand and try this out for myself. We're going to demonstrate this here in our next segment of Alaska Weather Facts, but before we go, we want to remind you that EPSCoR, which is a new acronym for me now, but I'm going to remember this because you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter, and I invite you to do that. Alaska EPSCoR is also something that facilitates science learning at the University of Alaska around the state, and that stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So check that out and make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to have the next version where we actually get our hands in the sand and check out how this works and demonstrates that topography. So for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you again next time.
Welcome back to the show, and now on to your marine forecast. Taking a look here at the ice edge, we're looking basically not much change in the ice today. However, you should be aware that if you're in the coastal areas, and especially around Kotzebue Sound, we do have that strong push coming through, so you'll want to be aware that there is a little bit of a storm surge. So pushing on that ice edge in coastal areas should be aware that we do have that push because of the storm surge that could push into the coastal areas. So they are keeping a look on that at the National Weather Service out of the Fairbanks office. So, and I'm sure they will keep you informed. Be sure to check out our website there at weather.gov/Alaska. Now on to your southeast forecast for tomorrow, Thursday, looking at windy conditions developing across those northern channels, especially in the afternoon, with some gusty conditions and even some freezing spray across the inner channels there. 40 knots there, gale warning to the north and towards the south, that change of direction out of the southeast. And then across the outer waters, more of an offshore flow to the north with a northwesterly flow there to the south, small crafts for the northern waters. Looking at your Friday forecast, even stronger winds will be setting up. That'll be a very gusty day across the inner channels especially. Haven't seen this across the inner channels for a while, but we could see higher gusts up to 70 knots across those inner channels. So be on the lookout for higher seas between 5 to 8 feet as well. And then storms even across the northern waters there at 50 to 50 knots with slightly lighter winds there to the south between 25 to 35 knots. Looking at the south central for tomorrow, the stronger winds will be setting up for the afternoon, starting out a little bit lighter and increasing to 35 to 40 knots all across the Gulf waters, and then also along the southern areas of the Cook Inlet and the Shelikof Strait. Seas on this day will be between 7 to 12 feet across the Gulf waters and 4 to 13 feet along the areas of the Cook Inlet back towards Shelikof. On Friday, expect winds to be pretty much just as gusty, a little bit more of a northerly change in direction. And then we'll see seas on this day approximately the same, 5 to 8 feet across these inner waters, and then the Gulf will be between 7 to 14 feet. Look for those gusty conditions, especially along the channel terrain. Looking at the southwest Alaska Peninsula areas, 15 to 20 knots across the area with small crafts there just south of Kodiak Island or the eastern peninsula. Seas will be 3 to 5 feet across the Bering, and the Pacific will see 6 to 7 feet. On Friday, change of direction for the wind, more of an easterly flow to the north, and we'll see 20-knot winds for most of the area, except a little stronger as you get close to Kodiak, around 35 knots out of the north. Seas on this day 4 to 5 feet, and then to the south there's 6 to 10 feet. Across the Aleutian area for Thursday, looking at winds to be strongest out towards Shimia, between 35 to 40 knots as you head towards the central Aleutians. So gales to the west and small crafts to the east, with seas much higher out towards the west between 20 to 22 feet, and the rest of the area will be seeing between 6 to 14 feet. Highest seas, of course, on the Pacific side, and then a southeasterly flow will be the dominant condition for your Friday, with gales out towards the west. The west coast for tomorrow will see winds out of the south and west direction, except just towards the west coast south of Nunavak Island. There will be more of an offshore flow at 15 knots. Seas will be between 5 to 12 feet, with the highest seas out towards the central areas of the Bering. On Friday, look for more of a south flow towards, and also towards the southeast direction for much of the coastline. We'll see 20 to 25 knots, so small craft advisories, not too bad, but look for a freezing spray both on Thursday and Friday. Looking at your coastal areas along the northwest and north coast, we'll see 25 to 35 knots, very strong winds with storm force winds setting up for the eastern Beaufort seacoast into your Friday, and then we'll see 20 to 30 knots across the northwest coast, a little bit lighter speeds there on Friday. Taking a summary of your weather for tonight, look for this front to be pushing through in the overnight hours, very gusty conditions and blizzard-like conditions across most of the Brooks Range, and with storm warnings across the west coast. This cold front's going to be pushing south as we head into Thursday, causing wind havoc across the southern areas of the state, and into Friday that will continue, especially for the southeast. Have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Alaska's Energy Desk is a collaboration between reporters across the state, from Anchorage to the North Slope and from Juneau to Unalaska.